Hey, everybody, it's the Line Podcast, recording this one, July 5th, 2024. Bit of a wrap up on federal politics coming your way in moments, and I called it, The Liberals Have No Garumba. We're going to talk about Stampede, not just the party, but the significance of it and why it might be significant that a certain someone isn't attending this year. And a week after I published a column, some very interesting reaction to it has been coming in, but only privately. We're going to tell you about all that and more on the latest episode of the Line Podcast.
This episode of The Line has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
Jen, I want to start by noting something. I'm in my new studio setup this week. I just want to beg the indulgence of the listeners. It's a little bit, the viewers as well. It's a little bit improvised right now, so forgive any issues on that front. I need a couple more days and a few more parts deliveries before this thing is operating fully. But so far, so good. And Jen, I will also...
But I will say... It is looking extremely Matt Gurney. It's given me Gurney vibes in the best kind of way.
So the video that viewers will see is truncated. It's like the way this works is it takes sort of a widescreen video and it cuts it in half. You get one half, I get the other half. If viewers could see the full arrangement, it would be even more Matt Gurney. So what I'm going to do, just for the viewers, because I love them, is that I'm going to take a picture that captures the full experience, and we will overlay it on the video version right now so that people get to enjoy the full weird Matt Gurney experience. My sister was one of the people I used as a sounding board as I was setting this up, and her comment was, "You are an odd duck, but you seem to have monetized your eccentricities so good." And yeah, I'll go with that. The only thing I will mention is that I'm in a more rural area and there was a loud bird outside. So sorry, that's basically all I've got. You ready to talk a little federal politics?
Yes, but firstly, slight momentary housekeeping. I am not a rural area, but I am now trapped at home with my children. So if one of them makes a cameo or if you can hear screaming from below, that's what that is. And I'm not even going to attempt to prevent it. Normally we try to clip that stuff out of the podcast, but today I've given up. I also have road work happening outside, but I think our road walk, it's the summer, road work season. So this is just the chaos in which I am functioning now. Our program does seem to have a really excellent noise reduction program, so I don't think you're hearing it in the background. So that's great. But anyway, apologize right up the front. We're doing the best we can in the midst of a Canadian summer. This is what it is. Let's get into it because Matt, the other thing that every day's a gift. Matt, I'm really excited that I am not eating crow today. Because I remember last week we were talking about there seemed to be some kind of liberal coup imminent. They had lost St. Paul's. We knew that St. Paul's was going to be the trigger for all kinds of internal liberal drama. They did lose St. Paul's. The drama commenced and a coup, like a very early stage coup, was in the works as we recorded last week. And I think I went pretty hard or double down on Trudeau's not going anywhere. And the answer was, I don't think that anyone in his cabinet actually has the garumba. The garumba. Yeah. You use the term. I don't know what this term is. I still haven't checked. Garumba. Thank you. And that's just, I think, a fairly straightforward way of saying that I think that if there was an actual cohesive liberal caucus or a grassroots party that was interested in its own long-term self-preservation and still had its head grounded in consensus reality, Trudeau would already be gone. Like they would have moved on this months ago, maybe even a year ago. The fact that they're putting this off to the last possible moment that they could realistically do it, still run a really new leadership campaign, and then set that leader up ahead of a probable 2025 election, is telling me that the will just actually isn't there. And I just have mixed feelings, but mostly I have feelings of happiness that I'm not having to be proven wrong 1 week later, because the coup commenced and I think it's gone nowhere. It's completely fizzled out, and I suspect it's now too late. It's now July 5th. In my head, the drop dead date for getting Trudeau out was probably July 4th. I think it's over. I think it's done. I think they're stuck with him until the next election, and unless someone within the Liberal caucus just totally panics at some point in the next year, I think this is how the next election is shaping out. But hey, man, argue me wrong. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No, I think I agree with that. I think you're right. And I will say this is important. Garumba is a Nausicaan curse. Nausicaans are an antagonist alien race from Star Trek, and a very young ensign Jean-Luc Picard was taunted by a Nausicaan who said, "You're like all Starfleet. You talk and you talk, but you have no Garumba." And then young ensign Jean-Luc Picard took great offense to that, started a bar brawl, and they ended up being stabbed through the heart, and his heart was replaced with a synthetic pump unit. So that's important context. You and I last week were podcasting against the backdrop of a couple of pretty wild things. There had just been the by-election. The newspapers and other media outlets were full of leaky liberals chattering away. And there had been our buddy Justin Ling.
Love me a leaky liberal.
Our buddy Justin Ling had that spectacular article in the Toronto Star where he was sitting in the first class lounge waiting for a Via train. And Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister, was chatting away on his phone. So, and then Justin, good reporter that he is, he just listened and then wrote an article about it. And obviously, there were concerns in the liberal ranks.
Yes. Oh, my God.
There were obvious concerns in the liberal ranks about some kind of a mutiny. I tend to agree with you that if it was going to happen, it would have happened already. And one of the things, and look, I don't think this story is totally dead. There are still trickles coming out. So I'm agreeing with you that it's unlikely, but I think you and I should cover our own butts and in each other's butts here and just say, to me, it's like 75, 80% chance he stays, but I'm leaving room for wild card events. One of the things that came out this week was that there have been demands by the Liberal caucus for a meeting, and the Prime Minister has refused that. But he is speaking with caucus members individually. And to me, that's smart. If you're Justin Trudeau, I think that's smart. You don't want to feed the mob mentality, right? You talk to everybody individually. And I think you also take advantage of the fact, and it was something before we started recording, you noted this. Everyone's dispersed. Caucus is home, right? Like if you wanna have a mutiny, you kind of need a critical mass where people can run into each other in the washrooms or whisper in the halls. You can have secret meetings. When the caucus is dispersed, I think the advantage goes to the king, not to the plotters. Zoom, etc., has probably changed that calculus a little bit, but I don't think all the way.
Not enough. Well, okay, so the other thing that I think we need to note in terms of the latest drama from the Liberal caucus is that just after we recorded last week, Liberal MP Wayne Long, I believe, started this open letter, and it was an open letter to all of caucus calling for new leadership. And it sounds like this turned into a giant, ridiculous reply-all clown show internally. And this, of course, this open letter and this simmering resentment started to all come out. It all started to bleed out in these reply-all chains. This happened after everybody basically had gone home for the long weekend. So, like you said, if you want, typically speaking, if you're doing the spills or if you're doing a caucus revolt, there's a couple things that need to happen. One is that people need to be together and actually working together at lightning speed to try and get stuff done and make moves and actually decide who alliances are forming by. So much of communication is nonverbal, and so much of communication has to do with body language and where people are sitting and how they're presenting themselves and their tone of voice. I don't think that you can actually get a caucus revolt going by Zoom. I don't think that that's possible. There's just too much. I don't know. It's a very human. It's almost like a convention floor kind of a vibe, right? Like it's a very human kind of thing to try and be ousting your boss, right? So that started to happen. It turned into a reply all disaster. Everybody had gone home, and the momentum just very quickly dissipated. And if you want a caucus revolt to be successful, momentum is pretty key. It needs to be decisive. It needs to gain followers, and it needs to move quickly in order to make the ousting happen. The second thing I think is what makes a caucus revolt actually successful is that the leader loses the confidence of the House, right? If a leader can't maintain the confidence of the House, they can't lead, and they've got to go to the Governor General and say, I'm out. But that confidence is only actually tested in certain mechanisms, one of them, for example, being a budget and the other one being a confidence vote. So if you start a caucus revolt after Parliament rises, there's no leverage because there's no way that you can have a confidence vote. There's no way you can have a budget. So all of the leverage that these backbench MPs might have had by saying, leave or we're out, we don't vote for you, say we don't vote for your budget, all of that was spent back in March. They have no momentum. They have no leverage, at least not until the House is back in session. So this goes nowhere. I think this absolutely goes nowhere. In fact, I'm willing to go right up into the 99th percentile in certainty on that front. And because this is going to go nowhere, and it's going to go nowhere to the rest of, and also the other thing I would just point out here, and I'm sorry for not bringing this up a second ago, instead of seeing momentum grow since the open letter came out, the opposite's happened. What happened was it looks like all of the other Liberal MPs who were discontented started to look around and see who else was signing the letter before they signed on to the letter. And then what also started to happen is I think the demand started to downshift. So initially it was like, we need new leadership. And now it's like, we need a meeting. You've already lost it. You've lost the narrative. You've lost the momentum right off the bat. And you lost it in like 2 days. Right. So now Justin Trudeau is not going to give these guys even the benefit of a meeting because, again, why should he? They have no leverage. And they have no internal cohesion or coherence, so they can't actually force him to do anything. And he's not facing a confidence motion of any kind for months. And by the time he probably does face another confidence motion, it's going to be radically too late to offend him. So I think that they've essentially played this out appropriately. The other thing that I would say is I suspect that there's a faction within the Liberal caucus who understand perfectly well that they're going to lose, are really pissed off with Trudeau and would like new leadership, but who also understand that any replacement of leadership is only going to be a squandering of talent on that bench. I mean, if we look at what's happening, for example, Rishi Sunak essentially just lost the UK election. This was a classic example of a flailing Conservative party at the end of its term, its natural term, putting actually a reasonably talented figure at the forefront of its forefront of the parade, just as the parade was about to walk off a cliff. So in the result, Rishi Sunak, who probably could have been, in 5-10 years, a generational prime minister because he failed the marshmallow test and took that role too soon, instead was prime minister for, a little more than a year, I believe, right? And is now probably out of politics, realistically. So, I think there's probably a faction within the the Liberal caucus that is looking at this and saying, no, Trudeau, you've been driving this bus. It's time for you to drive it off the side of the cliff, and it's time for you to take the honorable loss here so that we can then clear the House, get new leadership and get the next generation of leadership going and actually rebuild the party from whatever state you leave it in the next election. And I suspect that if I were in the Liberal caucus, that's probably where my thoughts would be. It wouldn't be that I'd be happy with with Justin Trudeau's leadership or the people at the top right now. But I would probably be saying something to the effect of, I'm going to focus on my constituency and trying to preserve my seat to the best of my ability. And I'm going to pull in all of my resources and call on all my chips to do that so that I can be one of the pieces of the furniture that gets saved when this collapse happens. And then what's going to happen is once Trudeau is toast, once he goes down, resign with honor and allow us to rebuild from the wreckage. That would be my calculation on this. But again, I'm also very much outside the partisan bubble, and I also understand that partisanship is a bit of a brain disease. So, I mean, who knows? There could be a lot of Liberals out there who actually think that Trudeau's going to win the next election and he's genuinely fantastic. I mean, who am I?
You're Jen Gerson. And actually, I want to talk about Jen Gerson just for a moment, because Jen Gerson, to your point about organizing by Zoom, Jen Gerson, I believe it was in Maclean's a number of years ago, had the definitive takedown of the story of the night the Ontario Progressive Conservatives blew Patrick Brown out in airlock. And they did it with a caucus revolt when they were an opposition party. And they did it with a conference call. and Patrick Brown was on the conference call, and Patrick Brown he let everybody talk, air their views, and then he's like, hey, like, I think it was one of his staff is like, hi everybody, just so you know, the leader is on the call. He's been here the whole time. So there are risks to it, obviously. You never know who's listening on a Zoom. But I think it really comes down to what we were talking about before, Garumba. Because, I'm going to throw another Star Trek quote at you here. I mean, it's from Otherwise, but I'm quoting specifically Captain Benjamin Sisko of Starbase Deep Space Nine and the USS Defiant. Fortune favors the bold. And if you're going to take a shot at the king, don't fire warning shots piecemeal. You go for it. And Wayne Long wasn't it. And if there had been 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 liberals coming out and going, yeah, he's got to go. If Wayne Long's letter had been overwhelmingly well received, then I think your point is well taken about there not being a confidence trigger anytime in the immediate future. But it still could have forced Trudeau to basically be, all right, I'm going to announce I'm stepping down as leader, but I'm going to stay on for 3, 6, 12 months, whatever, in a care to oversee a transition process. And also I want to mention that you'd said something interesting as well. You talked about how the demands have been watered down. You and I are half on vacation this week, so we're not paying as much attention to the news as normal, but I have been obviously reading the news. And one of the things that did come up was that Trudeau has refused a caucus meeting, but he has been speaking with members of caucus. And the Toronto Star has reported one of the things that he is hearing is that you got to make big changes at the top of your team. And this is something you and I have been saying for a while, and we don't say this with any disrespect to the team, but I think it's been clear for years that there are bandwidth issues at the PMO, and I don't know if it's too small of a team. I don't know if it's an appropriately sized team micromanaging too much. I don't know if it's a perfect team, perfectly sized, that's been burnt out by fucking awful things we've all been through in recent years. I don't know, and I'm kind of agnostic on that. But I do know that, like you talked about the demands getting watered down, right? Wayne Long wants a new leader. The caucus is settling for phone calls and they're telling him fire some of your people. So again, guys, like there's tactical reasons for all of this, but if you were going for the kill shot against the leader, politically speaking, of course, it's a metaphor. You talk and you talk, but you have no Garumba.
The other thing I would just put a bow on that, and I would reiterate what I'm saying next week, is that where individual calls leads is essentially you have individual backbench MPs who are now lobbying for parliamentary secretary positions and maybe cabinet roles. So what this winds up being is the leader gives you a call. Are you unhappy? Let's talk about how we make you happy. Right? Like, and so it winds up being horse trading, right? And so what we absolutely will see here, and I think that's more or less guaranteed in early fall now, is there will be a huge cabinet shuffle, and my guess is that the size of cabinet's going to get bloated because Trudeau's going to have to call in favors to keep people happy. So what are the chips he has to trade? Well, parliamentary secretary positions and cabinet roles, right? So this winds up being less diplomatic postings for people who are leaving potentially. Yeah, that's an option. Or appointments to various blah 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 blah. You're going to find a lot of people are going to get very sweet little, and maybe they're only in those roles for a year, right? But they're going to get sweet little packages and sweet little pay grade upgrades over the next a year to keep things ticking along. So anyway, I think that's kind of my suspicion of where this ends. That doesn't mean I rule out the possibility of people panicking in a year, right? But like that would be what this looks like before the next budget. The polls continue to be low. Some high level liberals start realizing they're going to lose their seats, and mass panic starts to hit, and then there's some kind of disorganized spill kind of scenario. That I don't rule out. But that at this point would be a sign of just sheer absolute dumb panic, right? Also, I'm going to say this. You are entirely correct to call me out on my earlier position when I was like, well, I don't spills don't really happen on phone calls, they happen in person. And then to be like, yeah, but they happened to Patrick Brown. You're right. In fact, I totally forgot about that. So, which is hilarious because I did write that piece. And that piece was, again, a gift. While we're on the concept, the theme of journalistic gifts, I think also that was a very, very specific scenario. And also the other thing you did notice is that, yes, that happened over a conference call. It happened in response to sort of allegations of sexual misconduct by Patrick Brown. We're not going to relitigate all that, but it happened under allegations of that, just basically in the early stages of the Me Too era. So what happened was their caucus internally panicked, got together, and were like, we need to move right now. And they did move. The consensus coming out of caucus was like, we have 2 hours to do something dramatic here, or we're going to be in deep SHIT. And that was the scenario. It wasn't a scenario of long-standing grievance building up to a by-election result, right? So the scenarios were a bit different, but you are correct to point out that I had completely forgotten about that one. Bad me.
No, it's okay. Things happen. You've had some kids since then. I don't remember years of my life. All I would say,
it was a long time ago, man.
Two quick points. We'll wrap this one up. One of them is that last weekend, we didn't publish a dispatch because you and I took a long weekend, but we did have a column by a friend of the line, Mitch Heimpel, which sort of laid out based on previous experience, and Mitch Heimpel's an experienced political guy, what leadership revolts in Canada have looked like. And he also made some comparisons to the UK and Australia where these things are more common. One thing he did note was that the only indispensable person is the leader. And that's why when I was reading in the Star this week, the caucus is demanding changes at the staff level, I went, okay, that's what Mitch was talking about. And the other point I would say in terms of one of the reasons why you may be 99% confident, but I'm 75 to 80% confident Trudeau sticks around, there are more by-elections that have to happen. And I don't know if any of them will have the shock value of St. Paul's, but events, dear boy, events. So that's just kind of what I'm waiting to see on that front. But other than that, I think we've ably talked this one to death. Anything else, or do you want to like and subscribe this?
I think we should like and subscribe this.
Like and subscribe.
This episode of The Line has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and regulations, today nearly 5 million Canadian adults smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. Right now, accessing information about these options is heavily restricted in Canada. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco and vaping products provide a potentially less harmful choice than cigarettes. Cigarettes burn tobacco, resulting in smoke that contains 6,000 harmful chemicals that are associated with smoking-related disease and death. Heating tobacco and vaping products have the potential to significantly reduce this risk. Health agencies around the world are now considering these alternatives to help end smoking. Updated laws can help adult smokers better understand the full range of options available, including the relative risk of these products. Millions of Canadians smoke cigarettes. Technology exists that can help change that, but policymakers need to take action. Learn about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at unsmoke.ca.
Jennifer, we were talking in the last segment all about the liberal coup machinations. There's one thing I didn't bring up, and I didn't bring it up because I actually think it's a better conversation to have now, after the like and subscribe break. One of the things that is interesting is that the Prime Minister is not attending Stampede. And I want you and I to spend a minute or two speculating why, but I also, before we do that, I think every Canadian knows what Stampede is. I've been to Stampede. I love Stampede. Want to take my kids to Stampede one day. Didn't work this summer for various reasons. Huge Stampede fan. Calgary explained to me what Stampede is, but more importantly, why it matters.
Okay. So Stampede, I don't know how sociological I want to get here, but Stampede, I believe, began in 1912, and this started as this kind of not faux rodeo exactly, because of course Alberta has always been a cattle ranching center as a result of our geography and our climate. But I think in around 1912, definitely the western provinces of Canada, like a lot of the western states, very much got wrapped up in the romance of cowboy culture, which at that point had kind of, how should I say this, petered out. Sort of the peak, what we think of the cowboy serial, the cowboy western, that was actually mid to late 19th century at its latest. And that all kind of was starting to peter out by the time a lot of the western cities in Canada were being settled, colonized. But in around sort of 1910, there was this kind of romantic revival of Western culture, the idea of homesteading, the idea of cowboys and I mean, I'm going to use the term cowboys and Indians here because I mean that was the way that was phrased at the time. I know that the word Indian is pejorative, and I don't mean it in that way in this context. Thank you very much. But that romance was starting to undergo a kind of revival in at the turn of the century, and Calgary really cottoned on to that revival and created Calgary Stampede, which is this mixture of carnival, festival, and rodeo at the same time. And over time, it really became indelibly linked to Calgary's identity as a city and as a community of people. So every year for about 2 weeks in July, everybody in Calgary gets into this. Everybody in Calgary has proper like Western style clothing that they wear only at Stampede with like the embroidered cowboy shirts. Everybody's got a proper Smith belt, hat, big white hat. When people come to visit Calgary, for example, big dignitaries come to visit Calgary, there's something called a white hatting ceremony where the mayor will come out with a Calgary, hat, like the cowboy hat, and give them the hat. This was rather infamously noted when Will and Kate came to visit, and they didn't immediately put on the hat. And everybody's like, "What do you mean you're not putting on the hat? Like, what's wrong with you? You put on the hat." Anyway, so this is a big deal. It's a big part of how Calgary. You have a tourist. Everybody's got a version of the hat. I mean, I think I got like my hat from Value Village. Like, you know what I mean? Like everybody's got a hat. Everybody wears the cowboy boots. Everybody goes into it, and we all pretend like this is a real part of our city's heritage. Because over time, it kind of has become a real part of our city's heritage. And so I think Calgary hosts one of the largest one of the largest rodeos in North America. I will have to double check this. I will double check what the pot is, but I think the pot for winning some of the events is like up to $1 million. It's a huge deal outside of, I think it's the largest rodeo outside of Texas, in fact, and may even be a little bit larger depending on how you're counting it. So we have chuck wagon races, we have bull riding, there's all of the horse barrel racing, all of that stuff happens. It's super competitive. It attracts some of the best rodeo athletes in North America. I think this is part of the rodeo circuit. And it's all incorporated into a really fun fair. There's also, Stampede has what is still, I believe, still called Indian Village. So they still call it this, where a lot of the local First Nations communities will set up traditional teepees and do educational stuff for people who are visiting the Stampede. So it's a really great event. It's fantastic for kids. It's a lot of fun. Attached to this, all of the local all the local offices will do their own Stampede parties, and sort of who's doing well, who's who in the zoo and who's doing well in corporate Calgary can be determined by how much money they put into their Stampede parties. So it becomes an actual thing you have to attend and go to and spend money on. And then also just about everybody, like from community associations to law firms to shopping malls to politicians, will host Stampede breakfasts. And this is where you can go to an outdoor event and like literally politicians will be standing there flipping your pancakes for you. And people come by the hundreds, by the thousands for their free pancakes and sausages. It's a hugely important, let's put it this way. Stampede, on one hand, kind of, when you're a young adult, kind of feels like, oh God, Stampede, it's so lame. But as an older adult now, middle-aged adult, I really appreciate Stampede, firstly, because kids love it. Like, it's a great, great family thing. Also, there's a big parade, too, that's happening right now. Otherwise, I'd be there with my kids. And then the other thing, too, I've appreciated is that Stampedes have made me really appreciate the importance of community festivals and celebrations in creating a cohesive culture and civic society. No, I don't think any other city I've lived in Canada does something that's quite like Stampede, but this is a city where everybody comes from somewhere else. Everybody here is an immigrant from some other part of the world or some other part of the country. And when you participate in your first Stampede and you get your hat for the first time and you put on the shirt and you get your cowboy boots and you doll yourself up and you participate in the community ritual, you become a Calgarian. It doesn't matter where you're from, you become a Calgarian in that point. Like it has this effect on people that really creates a sense of identity that is really important. And I think it's why social cohesion and a sense of community spirit and esprit de corps exists in Calgary in a much more strong way than it does in other cities in this country. Other cities may disagree with me, but for me, I saw that sort of thing play out during the 2013 floods, when the way that the city just sort of spontaneously came together and started mucking out each other's neighbors' basements. I personally think that Stampede is why you see that happening spontaneously in places like Calgary, because that community ritual, that history, that sense of community gathering, the clothes, the parade, the pomp of it all of that contributes in a really important way to a sense of what makes Calgary, Calgary, and a sense of also welcoming and cohering people into a Calgarian identity in a really effective way. Once you've lived here through Stampede, you basically can't leave. You get tagged. But anyway, so that's there. And as a result of this importance of this particular festival in this particular part of the world, Calgary is a huge stop in the political circuit. It's the beginning of, I think, the summer barbecue circuit for a lot of politicians. Many politicians from right around the country come here for Stampede, and they do their time at the pancake flipping station. This is a thing. It's a thing that you have to do. And if you are especially an Alberta politician, you have to be at Stampede. Like it's a non-negotiable. And part of the ritual is serving people by standing for several hours at those pancake flipping stations. Like you have to demonstrate humility and service in that way. It's just part of what you do. Anyway, so what is the significance of Justin Trudeau not coming to this? Well, Trudeau has come to Stampede in the past. I believe, although my memory may not be serving me correctly, either last year or the year before, he had a big incident at a pancake station where he screwed up the flipping of the pancakes, and it was a whole big deal, which was kind of embarrassing. Also, we know that Calgary is not a part of the country where Justin Trudeau is generally expected to be well received. This would be a part of the country where you would expect protesters to show up and angry protesters to show up with giant F Trudeau flags. So that's unpleasant. The other thing that I think is interesting here is that Trudeau actually has been coming to Calgary quite a lot in recent months, like more than normal, but always in highly controlled events. So not well publicized, only people who are known Liberal supporters invited, or he did, for example, the Ryan Jesperson interview. So it was very much in and out, and then in a very closed, controlled way. I expect there's probably some fundraising going on. A lot of fundraising money in Canadian politics comes out of Alberta, both at the provincial and the federal level. So that might be a little bit about what's going on. I don't know, but I've always been wondering why Trudeau is doing all of these trips to Calgary, because of course there was no hope of electoral gain in it. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on there. But it is also interesting that in the wake of all of these trips to Calgary, he's very explicitly avoiding Stampede, which is a really important political event. On one hand, I'm not surprised, because I do suspect that, he would be protested. There could be incidents. I do think that could just be what's being the factors that are going into this. On the other hand, you have to ask yourself, well, is he not coming to Stampede because of this caucus coup that's unfolding, right? I don't know, but I say, put it this way, I was hearing that Trudeau wasn't coming to Stampede a couple weeks ago, which means either they knew that there was a possibility of a caucus coup unfolding, or this was made for more high level reasons. The decision was made for more high level reasons.
For what it's worth, I was hearing the same thing weeks ago, that Stampede was either a question mark or it wasn't happening, but they were delaying the announcement. I got a couple of quick fire comments to make, and we'll move on. First of all, I love Stampede. Like I'm not just saying this to butter up the Alberta listeners. It's a fantastic event, and I am genuinely excited to get my kids out to it one day. We got lots of friends in Calgary, yourself and your family obviously included, but it's like I've been kind of meaning to do a family visit to Calgary anyway. But Stampede would be when we would do it. We would time any visit to Calgary specifically to overlap with Stampede. I think on talking about...
Well, you wouldn't want to come between November and like May.
No, we wouldn't. During those months, we travel south.
Summer's
west.
the time to do it.
I would.
Yes.
I think on talking about Western culture, I don't mean Western Canadian or the West. I mean, like, as you said, we'll use the impolitic phrase, cowboys and Indians, right? And again, I'm using that ironically along with Jen.
Yeah.
I find that era in history fascinating. And I'm surrounded right now behind me by historical knickknacks. A B-24 Liberator bomber, which is what my grandfather flew. I have a World War I combat helmet. Like, the era of Western expansion in North America is absolutely fascinating to me. I might be the only dumb fuck out there who's excited to see the Kevin Costner quadrilogy, which he seems to have lost a ton of money making. So Stampede's a bit of a taste of that, but I think you're probably right about the civic binding effect of something like that. I would suggest, as probably an Eastern counterweight to Stampede, Carnival in Quebec City. So that could be kind of how we have that. But I'll tell you, Toronto is nothing like that. Like, Toronto has the X, which is fun.
Yeah. The X and Caravana, I would say.
Sure, and even Pride. Like, there are big events in Toronto, but I think at a certain point, once a metropolitan area gets that big, you can't celebrate things collectively. Like, when the Raptors won, there were like 1 million, maybe 2 million people at that parade. Probably about the city of Calgary was at that parade, and it was still 15% of the GTA's population. Beyond a certain point, you can't celebrate things at scale. If the Leafs won a Stanley Cup, the city would go apeshit. But it would probably still only be maybe a third of it who would pay attention.
Do you want to know what I would observe as someone who's lived in Calgary longer in Calgary, but I've lived in Toronto, and I would say the big celebratory events in Toronto are to some extent more exclusionary than inclusionary. So Pride, for example, yeah, everybody can come to Pride. I've been to Pride. Yeah, that's fine. But the stars of the show of Pride aren't the people of Toronto. It's the LGBTQ community of Toronto, right? So there's an exclusionary aspect of it. Whereas a Caravana, for example, again, I've been to Caravana. Caravana's fantastic. It's a wonderful event, but it's an event to highlight that particular community, and everybody can participate and watch it. But it's meant for a particular community, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Those events, like, well, sure, but here's where I would say is that this is why I think poor broken souls like yourself are forever attached to the Maple Leafs, regardless of how poorly they do over history. And that's because there is only one in Toronto. There really is only one collective thing that everybody gets to sign on to in the same way in equal measure. And that's the Maple Leafs, the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it's why you guys are left clinging to this sad team in a way that, for example, in Calgary, yes, I mean, the Calgary Flames haven't won in a really long time. That's very heartbreaking. And when the Calgary Flames go to the playoffs, that's a really big deal for us too, 100%. But we don't have like the poor zombie broken souls every year when the Calgary Flames don't make the playoffs. And I think that that's actually because we do have a community festival that binds us together. And whether like it or lump it, it's Stampede. I don't think there's an equivalent thing in Toronto. I think, yeah, you're right. I think Quebec has that with, as you were mentioning, Carnival. That might be an equivalent. But like when I was in Vancouver didn't have anything like that. There was nothing like Stampede. There's nothing like there's nothing that has a Stampede is literally for everybody in every corner of the city. Everybody does a thing. Everybody participates. Everybody pitches in. It doesn't matter how long you've been to Calgary. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter your ethnicity. Doesn't matter your sexuality. Everybody does Stampede. At least if you don't even go to the Stampede crowds, at the very least you're going to your local community association or your local church for a free Stampede breakfast. So everybody participates at a minimum level in it, right? That's hard to replicate spontaneously, and it's a really powerful thing if you live in a city that has it. It's a very, very cool thing.
Go Leafs go. Yeah, no, I think I would basically agree with that. I don't think I disagree with anything you're saying there. And by the way, it's not yet displayed on the shelf, but just for the record, go Leafs go. Um, all my personality in various objects which are to be displayed. I would, yeah, like my sense on the political. So again, I think you and I are both big on the Stampede as a community event, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. Trudeau not showing up, to me, I didn't do any sort of detailed macro level analysis of that. I just thought to myself, when the king fears a palace coup, he stays close to the palace. And I do know that he is going to attend the NATO summit in Washington. I don't know if he could shirk that one, especially like you can blow off Stampede when you're a Liberal Prime Minister easier than you can blow off a NATO summit when you're a Canadian Prime Minister. And I think right now, in particular, given the focus of our allies on our defense contributions, I think it would be a bad time to skip that one. But I would just say Washington's a flight away, like it's an hour. Stampede's a longer haul. So I don't know if the Prime Minister wants to be away from the palace right now. But I think that's all I really have to say about that. We love Stampede. Go Calgary. Go Leafs go. I want to just take a minute to wrap up two other stories that I just want to mention, and I don't think we need to get into any big analysis. General Wayne Eyre, who had previously joined us here on the line, our interview-based podcast, which we do kind of on an as-needed basis. General Eyre is retiring. So first of all, we wish him a very happy retirement and all the best. Many thanks for his service. The government has announced that Lieutenant General Kerrigan, I'm sorry, I'm not clear on the pronunciation yet. I got to work on that. Will be taking over as Chief of the Defense Staff, Canada's first female Chief of the Defense Staff. So obviously, congratulations to her, taking over the armed forces at a very challenging time for the military, for Canada, and for the world. So I think we both wish her all the best. I would love to drink a toast to her, but out my neck of the woods right now, Jen, we're eyeing the liquor reserves carefully. The LCBO is on strike. The first ever strike the LCBO has had. I wrote a column recently for TVO where I actually had to refamiliarize myself with alcohol distribution in Ontario because there have been a lot of Doug Ford era reforms. And it's more complicated than it used to, and the system's a little more resilient. It's not as dependent on the LCBO as it used to be. The beer store will still be operating. Grocery stores will still be able to sell wine and beer. And they do have supply arrangements that bypass the LCBO. But LCBO is still the importer and wholesaler for Ontario. So the beer store in a long strike scenario may be reduced to Ontario brews, some of which would be foreign labels, but brewed domestically. So it's going to be a weird scenario. There are wine sale outlets that can sell Ontario wines. Okay, no problem. There are beers brewed in Ontario, and the beer store can sell those. The LCBO has said it will be able to maintain distribution to restaurants and to grocery stores and other outlets authorized to sell alcohol, and it will still be able to do online orders. I'm guessing they're using non-unionized staff to kind of maintain like a skeleton operation. Managers basically fulfilling your wine order. But we'll see how long this goes. It's interesting. The union had said it was not just going on strike in an open-ended, we need a better deal way. They've walked off the job for a 2-week period. I'm going to be okay. I've got local brewers who meet my craft beer needs. But I know people, Jen, who last night made a last-minute run to the LCBO to stock up on whatever their drink of choice is. So you were running out of water for the last month. I'm okay. I'm in all the beer I need, but some of my friends here, they're getting thirsty too, just differently.
Okay, so can I point out that I'm like actually properly kempt and washed today? I didn't get a haircut, but like I don't have greasy hair. That's a great plus. It's a great improvement for me. The other thing I would say is now would be a great time to come visit Calgary for Stampede and alcohol. You know what never goes on strike here in Alberta? Alcohol. You want to know why? Because we don't have one centralized, body that takes care of alcohol sales. And let me tell you, I know that in Ontario, whenever the talk of alcohol reform comes up, Alberta gets thrown about as a bogeyman. As someone who's lived in Alberta for 10 years, no, Yeah, all of this you guys get fed in the Toronto Star about alcohol distribution in Alberta is complete nonsense. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've read some Toronto writer who comes to Alberta, goes to the shadiest alcohol store they can find at 2 o'clock in the morning and writes a column on it and says, this is the shady, dodgy alcohol situation in Alberta. And I'm like, no, you have the really high-end bougie alcohol places with the tasting wines and the tasting centers. And by the way, the selection there is better than LCBO. It's not close. And then you have like the dodgy 3 a.m. Alcohol store that is open at the corner of whatever and whatever. It spans, it runs the gamut. But let me tell you, like, you can go to my bougie suburban wine tasting store run by Co-op, conveniently located next to Co-op's cannabis outlet. Anyway, and you can get an LCBO equivalent or better experience. And then you can also find alcohol for your, trashy keg party at 2 o'clock in the morning at your local, downtown strip mall. Both options are available to you, and you have a choice.
Jen, I think...
And we don't go on strike. It's great.
I think the LCBO workers had some very fair demands. I mean, like, in common with public sector workers everywhere, they're on fixed rate contractual salary increases, and they've gotten hammered by inflation. They've been falling behind. So I think they had a very fair demand on the salary front, but they've also been tying themselves to the rail tracks of serious alcohol reform in Ontario. And my gut feeling is that this strike is a strategic miscalculation. They're making the case for their own obsolescence better than they are their own essential function. So we will see. But to all my friends in Ontario, remember, you've got great Ontario vintners. You've got local distilleries making really great small batch hooch. And you got craft brewers all over this province. So I'm going to be supporting mine. I encourage you to do the same. And I believe on that note, Jen, it's time for a like and subscribe. Well, look, Jen, we've been gabbing about different things for a while. I just wanted to follow up. Last week on the podcast, we'd already talked for a while. We both had things to do, so we only kind of brushed off of a column that I had written. It was published a week ago today, and it was not a rebuttal of your column recently. You were writing about people giving up on Canada. It was not a rebuttal because I agree with you, but it was a bit of a different take, which is what giving up on Canada will actually look like. And our friend and colleague, Andrew Potter, wrote a really nice Canada Day essay for The Line, where he offers an alternate perspective on how we should be approaching that. My sense, Jen, differs a little bit from yours, and I don't think they're in conflict. I just think they're complementary. My anecdotal sense in recent years, and I talked about this in the column, is that people are giving up on Canada. I agree with you on that. But I think only a fraction, maybe a sizable one, but still not everybody. Giving up on Canada doesn't mean leaving Canada necessarily. So some people, and I know some of these people, especially during the pandemic, said, fuck this socialist hellhole. They're oppressing my freedoms to give me those mRNA jabs, and I'm moving to fucking freedom in DeSantis land. I know people who did that. They came back pretty quickly. So they gave up. Some of them came back. Some of them are still there. But what I think is happening, I think it's more subtle than fuck y'all, I'm out. I think Canadians who have either the talent or the wealth or both, they don't always overlap, but they sometimes do. I think they're coming up with a plan B, which is, oh yes, we're going to snowbird down in Arizona, and we bought a condo down there, and it's on Airbnb most of the time. But now we have a bank account in Arizona. We have a place to live in Arizona. We bought an Obamacare bronze tier healthcare plan down in Arizona that has pretty high copays and things like that. And it's all about the golf and we hate the winters, etc. But all of a sudden, those Canadians have an outpost out of this country. And one of the things when I've been getting all these anecdotes in recent years, I know people think this is strongly political, that it's all of the fuck Trudeau stuff we were talking about a minute ago. I don't think it's that. I think what's radicalizing Canadians is some, But what I think is radicalizing Canadians is healthcare. Just people who are, and I had a fascinating conversation recently with a friend who is herself a healthcare professional. And she had said something to me that was interesting. She had said, Canadians, once they're in the system, still get fantastic world-class care. But every year, the dysfunction in the system is narrowing the pipeline of who can get in. And even 10, 20 years ago, you had to know someone to get fast care, right? About 10 years ago, my mom was sick. And thank God she's okay. But 100% I called in favors. And I called friends of mine who I knew would have favors. It takes a village, but we all worked our social connections, and my mom got really good health care because we pulled in some strings. I don't know if I could do it today. And I am reasonably affluent, high social capital. I live in the largest city in the country. I'm a native English speaker. I have strong social and business connections. I have no weird kind of punishing socioeconomic risk factors like mental illness or things like that. And what I just think about all the time, Jen, is that what if I was the opposite of all of those things? I am a poor immigrant woman who doesn't speak English in a rural area and doesn't know anybody yet. And I've got a lump in my breast, or I've got a cough that I can't shake. How the fuck do these people get healthcare?
And I don't have access to a family. I don't have access to a family doctor, so I have to get all of my specialists done on a walk-in clinic. So maybe I spend 3 hours in a walk-in clinic, and the doctor maybe blows me off and says it's fine.
Take this pill, and the system is porous. Remember about a year ago, I broke my foot? I couldn't navigate the system. And there are people in this country who are richer and better connected than I am, but there's not many of them. And as this pipeline gets narrower, I think an increasing number of Canadians who have paid into the system their whole lives, have always done the right thing, they're starting to go, what the fuck is this for? And they're worried about their kids or their spouses or themselves. And they're starting to find ways to get their money out. And they're not leaving because Canada's great. I love Canada. My neighborhood in the summer, it's fantastic 6 months out of the year.
Fantastic.
But if you can't get a doctor, you need a plan B. And I think people are getting that plan B.
Can I also say I think it's, but I also say I don't think it's just healthcare. Increasingly, as I'm going through the system, as I get older and I have to be exposed to the system more and more, for whatever reason, I'm starting to have to rely on social capital to get basic things.
I know.
And that's fine. I have social capital. By social capital, I mean, like, I've been a journalist in this country for like nigh on 15 years, maybe 20. I've lost count. Like, I know people. Like, I've got good friend networks. I've got good professional networks. I understand how to navigate bureaucracies. Like, I have this ability to do this. But I never had to rely on social capital on those specific skill sets to get basic things accomplished. And that's changing all around me now. And that alarms me a lot, because for exactly the same reason that you're pointing out. Yeah, great. I mean, I've been born in Canada. I speak the language. I understand the culture. Like I said, I understand how to navigate a bureaucracy. Like, I get that. But I'm probably, I can miss a day of work without missing rent. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I have these abilities here, and these incredible privileges, absolutely, I would call them. But I keep on thinking, holy shit, how would someone who has access to half of this navigate this particular problem? And I'm increasingly coming up with the answer. They couldn't. They wouldn't. They'd fall through the cracks. And that alarms me more and more. And that inspires me to want to use what social capital I do have to bring light to sort of some of this stuff and to bring changes where I can. Not that I necessarily want to go full activist on this sort of stuff, but I mean, like basic institutions should function at a basic level for basically everybody. And right now, I really think that that's not happening. And I think it's an inability to necessarily articulate that, but I think an understanding that that's not happening is driving a lot of the anger in this country.
I think you're exactly right. And the only thing I'd add, Jen, to this is that one of my little side theories about this is that the people who are doing this are doing it quietly, and they're doing it not under the table, but they don't want to draw attention themselves. They're establishing foreign real estate holdings, foreign bank accounts, foreign corporate structures, and they're migrating their money, not all of it, but some of it out. When someone does the full fuck you, I'm out, the full fuck you, I'm out of here is dramatic. People know your kids don't go to school anymore. You don't see your neighbors anymore. You have to change your mailing address. When you do the subtle plan B, no one notices. And since I published the column, the amount of email I've been getting from people saying either that I've done this or their children are doing it. Like, some people wrote me and go, I'm too old to do this. Like, I'm up in my 80s. I'm not moving, but my kids are out. My kids now have outposts in Portugal or Panama or Costa Rica or Mexico or Arizona and Florida and Texas. And anecdotes aren't data. I get that. But wow, putting this column out there, I got a lot of feedback.
But also, Matt, we do have data. The Wall Street Journal recently published this notice, and we are seeing stuff from Statistic Canada showing that investment outflows are now happening. There's more people investing. Canadians are starting to spend more money outside the country than they are in. Like, they're investing their capital this way. Because if you're sort of have your foot half in, half out the country, you're not going to be spending money on a business in Canada. You're going to be investing your money in a business or setting up a business in your outpost, right? Like, that just makes more sense. So what you're left with is this idea of Canada as a country club. It's a place you're going to spend 6 months out of the year, but it's not a serious country, so it's not the place where you're actually going to spend serious money. Anyway, on that note, we do have to put a pin in it and say like and subscribe. Enjoy the line. Check us out at www.readtheline.ca. And thank you very much for joining us for another hour of your time. We always appreciate it. Today's podcast was brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Now is the time to modernize Canadian laws so that adult smokers have information and access to better alternatives. By doing so, we can create lasting change. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.